Hi TLP, welcome to my podcast. Today we'll talk about everything about front-end development. So I think ever since I know you, we all know that you love JavaScript. So I think you will love the conversation today. Isn't it so?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So we'll try to do this conversation from a perspective that if a college fresher or someone in their early career listens to this and they wish to get into front-end development, what can they be doing? ठीक है? All
Okay.
set? Okay.
Yeah.
So let's start with what are your roles and responsibilities as a front-end developer? What does a day in a front-end developer's life look like? Go into as much specifics as possible.
So what are my roles and responsibilities as a front-end developer? I develop
Right.
front end of the web apps.
I told you to go into as much specifics as possible.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I develop specific features on the front end of web apps.
Hey, this is not a comedy podcast. This is an informative.
Okay. Okay, roles and responsibilities. Okay, from a college student's perspective, okay, let me get a little bit serious. So as a front-end developer, you'll have to develop the front end
You can't let me
of
do
web
this serious.
apps.
What
Okay,
is,
sorry.
what is
Okay,
Okay, let's start
serious.
with why do I call you TLP? What is TLP?
The lean programmer, yeah, that's
Yeah.
the name of the channel that I kept when I was
So
starting.
he's most
So I created
popularly known
Medium.
as the lean programmer because,
Mm,
yes.
because because I was fat when I created this name, the lean programmer. So that was
Oh, lean?
sarcastic.
You know the meaning of lean.
No, I don't know.
But I remember you weren't fat at that time. You're fatter now than you're not fat now, but you're more
Okay, you're fatter now. Okay, okay, okay. Good.
okay, we are
College
not
students.
following the spirit of the podcast. I feel.
Okay, we have to come back to the spirit of the podcast. Okay, so okay, let me get serious. So as a front-end developer, if you're a student right now, first question that you might be thinking would be is what's the future of front-end development role as a if you have to pursue it
Hmm.
as your career?
Hmm.
Because in backend, a lot of people think that backend is very wide. Backend may you can create REST APIs, you can create a lot of like backend can be as complex as you think. Like
Hmm.
think for example, let's take any app that you use.
Hmm.
Every app would have a different sort of a backend. For example, this podcast recording app that we are using, that will have a different kind of a backend. AI app might have a different sort of a backend. A food delivery app might have a different sort of a backend. But then when it comes to front end, people have this misconception that okay, front end is just front end. You have to show some, you'll get some content from the back end and you have to render it from
Yes.
to the front end. But that is not the case. Front end itself can get much as complex as you can think of. It can get very, very challenging at times. You have to maintain a lot of complex logic on front end. So front end is absolutely not just about rendering the content on the screen. This is the biggest misconception. There are a lot of aspects to it. Like, for example, how do you performance? How do you make sure that the performance of your website or web app or mobile app is how is your web app very performant? How do you reduce the latency? How do you make sure that all the chunks of your website load when they need to load? How do you make sure that how does it perform when the user is on a 2G or a 3G network? How and there are multiple aspects to it. For example, do you even want to show everything in a single go? Do you want to lazy load something? Or I think I've covered in most of my cases, I've in most of the examples I've covered mostly about performance.
Hmm.
The next thing can be scalability. How do you scale your app? Do you create new HTML elements for first of all, you don't even code in HTML, but
Hmm.
a lot of people have misconception that when it comes to front end, it's just some HTML. There are multiple frameworks. Like the most widely used is ReactJS, and if these days a lot of people are using NextJS, that's a framework. React is a library, by the way, where you end up writing HTML and those front-end components itself in JavaScript and TypeScript. By the way, TypeScript is better than JavaScript. At the end of the day, TypeScript compiles to JavaScript only, but it's better because it's typed language. Again, all those things I can go as deep as Spriha wants me to, but it will depend on what questions she's asking. She's going to ask, so I'll not give too many details in a single answer.
I'll
But
try
yeah,
to ask you
mostly
tough questions.
okay, sure, yeah. But for now, you have to understand as a college student, you have to understand that the biggest thing is front end is not just about getting some data from backend and styling it on the web page. It's not just that. It's about everything that you can think of:
Hmm.
performance, scalability, usage, how are people using your app when it comes to telemetry. What does telemetry means? It means getting the knowledge of how users are interacting with your app. Let's say you build three features together and users are just clicking on the first feature. Do you want to even keep the other two features? How are users clicking on it? What are the specific patterns? Can you build something on top of those patterns, generating heat maps based on users' interactions and so on? It's very, very wide uh, topic.
So if someone wants to learn all this, so you mentioned it's not just about rendering elements, it's also about performance and so many other things. So what are the best resources for someone who's completely new to front-end development to dip their hands into this and see if they're liking it?
That's a good question. So first thing that you have to do is, even before doing anything, even before jumping onto any resource or any YouTube tutorial, Udemy.
Hmm.
I hope I'm still audible. I think the recording got started from scratch,
No,
but it's
it
okay. Edit.
continue now. Yeah.
Okay. 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 So I was answering this question that, yeah, what is the resource? So
Yes.
before jumping onto any resource, and that's true for anything, that's true for AI, that's true for backend, that's true for everything. But for front end, especially, this is the most important thing that before jumping onto any course, any tutorial, you have to create a roadmap for yourself. You have to figure out what exactly are you going to learn, because in front end, again, it's as I said, it's not just about learning one specific framework or learning HTML and JavaScript. It's much
Hmm.
more than that. So the very first thing I would say is I can give a sample roadmap. The very first thing is learn the basics of HTML and CSS. That's the
Hmm.
very first thing.
Hmm.
Because no matter how advanced you go into front end development, at the end of the day, you might not even be touching HTML, but if you don't know what is HTML, it won't be front end, right? So yeah, the very first thing could be learning HTML and CSS. The next thing that you can learn is some CSS framework like Bootstrap or something, and try to build some of your portfolio website or anything like that. That will help you get a good hang of how do you show, how do you style elements on the screen,
Hmm.
and then learn JavaScript. JavaScript is you can see there's a good analogy that HTML is like the bones of the application.
Hmm.
If you compare it with a human being,
Hmm.
CSS is like the skin of it. Your skin can make you look better. Imagine people just walking with bones instead of like not having skin. That would be kind of weird to watch. Uh, the skeletons walking on the street. So that's where CSS comes in. And then JavaScript is like the muscle of your application. It can help you move. It can make your app dynamic. What JavaScript does is it can help users interact with your app. For example, let's say there's a form. What happens when you click on submit? What happens when you click on the drop down? Which specific element do you want to select? Do you want to do any more user interactions? So this is basic JavaScript. So once you have some basic knowledge in these three most important things, then you can ask some important questions like which library or framework do you want to learn? Some good, like I would recommend either go for ReactJS or go for Next. If you're going for Next, then you still have to learn some of the React because Next is kind of on top of React. So first learn about ReactJS and then try to build some web apps on your own. It could be a simple chatting application. It could be uh,
Hmm.
a Facebook clone, Netflix clone, something like that. a to-do application, a basic to-do application, anything, but just try to build some projects. Okay, this answer is going too long, but it cannot be a short answer, right? Because
So
obviously, if
next
you
thing,
have to,
I'll stop you for a bit in between and ask you, are building clones a good side project to showcase on your resume, or is this just for your understanding and knowledge?
I don't think it's good project for resume at all because at the end of the day, what's your resume? It's something that sets you apart from other candidates. And if you are building with something that someone else has already built,
Yeah.
when I say someone else, it's not just about clone. Like Netflix itself is out there. It's not
Hmm.
something new. How would you how would you make your resume stand out from other candidates? So building clones of shopping websites, building clones of these streaming applications like Netflix, Prime, and so on. These are good projects to learn, but these are not very good projects when it comes to your resume. So if you don't have any other idea, then it's okay.
Hmm.
Go ahead with them. But I would say think about something creative, think about something, and the best way to approach that is look at your daily life, look at what you do from day to night, and what's one challenge that you face every day or regularly. And based on that, try to have a software solution for that. For example, let's say Spriha, what problem do you face almost daily? Something which you think that why hasn't anyone done this? Think
Oh,
about
you're
it.
asking me.
Yeah.
या फिर ये सब
Okay.
जैसे ये इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स वगैरह मुझे सेटअप करना नहीं आता.
Okay. So you don't know how to set up electronics, and whenever you buy new
Yeah, so
electronics, you don't know what to do.
whenever I buy any electronics, I either have to call you or someone and you guide me step by step. Do this, do that.
Hmm. So how about a peer-to-peer helping app? You can start with your society. It can be a simple app. Probably try to see if it can be integrated with my gate or something else
Hmm.
where you need some immediate help within your society because most of the people live in society these days, at least in tech hubs like Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, and all. So in case you're living in a society, uh, you need some simple help with something, uh, like setting a new monitor. You don't know, you've never done that. So
Hmm.
and you don't need an electrician for that, obviously.
Hmm.
So as a good neighbor, uh, earlier what we used to do in old days, we would just knock the door of our neighbors. But these days, people are so into their own lives that they don't even know who their neighbor is. So
Hmm.
that app can even help you build connections with your neighbors. So build a simple app or a simple feature in MyGate or some other application which your society is using that can help you raise a simple request, a help request, an SOS kind of a request. Um, it shouldn't think about the designs in a way that it shouldn't look like I'm requesting for your services. It's not like I'm requesting for my neighbor's services to help set me a monitor, but it's like a simple favor app
Community
that I'm
building.
asking. Yeah, community building or a favor app that I raise a request and anyone who is free gets a notification. And you can also ask what people do. Let's say someone is a mechanical engineer, someone is into IT, someone is into electronics. What majors did they do in their college time? You can get information like these and have some backend logic to route your request to specific people. Only specific people get a notification on
I
their
know what
phone.
problem I face. I know what problem I face. Okay, this is a
What
problem.
problem?
But I think there must be a solution for it. Although sometimes my social media or phone usage is not checked, it goes a little haywire sometimes. So even though I put timers, sometimes I again remove the timer. And so if there would be something that would help me regulate that in a more meaningful way, that would be great.
So that's a simple idea. There are hundreds of apps like this, but you can always build a new app which is your specific solution. And what matters more
Mm.
is how are you designing it? When I
Mm.
say design, I don't more than the UI, I'm talking about the UX. When I say UI, it's the user interface, and UX is the user experience. So let's talk about the another example which we were talking earlier, a peer-to-peer helping application or a favor app. within
Hmm.
the society.
Hmm.
In that, you have to get all this information. What was the major of that person? What's the current profession of that person? But if you keep on asking all these things, that no one is going to fill that form. These days, it's so easy to onboard on an application. Like if your app is wasting too much time on asking these small bits of information, no one's going to use your app. So how can you just ask for their LinkedIn profile and fetch just ask for their LinkedIn profile on that app, nothing
And
else, and fetch all the information from the LinkedIn and automatically create a profile on that app based on the person's LinkedIn profile. And then whenever, let's say, within the society, you raise a request for I need help in setting up a monitor, that request does not go to someone who is a doctor.
hmm.
That notification itself goes only to a person who is into a software engineering or let's say electronics background. That's as simple as that. That's a great example of one app that you can build. It involves a good enough backend logic. It involves good enough logic for parsing, web scraping, and getting information from LinkedIn. It involves good amount of logic at front end also, because how are you going to make the app very simple to onboard to? An app can never be a successful app if it requires a lot of onboarding steps. Your app should be as simple to use as just you install the app. So, for example, the recording app that we are using for this podcast. Um, it, at the start, I was hesitant to do something. Why do I need another app for this? But then once I installed it, I didn't even have to log into it. Priya just gave me a link and I just clicked on that link and that's it. Everything was
Yeah, you have to
pre-set up.
remove the friction in the user experience.
Right. And this is one more aspect to front-end development. This is one major aspect. So again, front-end development is not just about CSS and HTML. It's about how performant your app is, how scalable your app is, how users are using your app, how minimal the efforts are required to set up your app. It's also about setting up the logs and telemetry, proper testing, your code should not break. Your code should run on every single size. Your code should be responsive. When I say responsive, it should be every single screen size should be able to accommodate for the real estate that's present for your features to render and so on. Okay, coming back to the another app example that you gave. What was that? I forgot.
It was
Uh,
purposefully using your phone, using it more
Purposefully,
purposefully.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That I don't even have to solve for you. Like you can think about it. If that's some real problem that you're facing, then you can think about what all features are missing in the current app that you're using. Probably, let's say one of those features could be your app tells you that your app limits the usage after 4 hours, but you are able to override that setting. But it's
Mm.
not generating any report. So
Of
probably
how,
one thing that you
what
can do,
kind of content was I watching? More analytics
yeah,
around that.
more analytics. Yeah. So you can
Yes.
do something like this. You can build an app that will keep a track of your usage, uh, and it will give a weekly report to you that, okay, your estimated time was
Hmm.
only 1 hour per day, but at the end of the day, you ended up overriding that for 3 days and you ended up watching 3 hours of Instagram. What kind of content you are watching on Instagram? But then again, when you do that, that again opens a lot of complexity about privacy. How will your users trust that you are not watching what they are watching? So that's another question. So how will you form trust
And
in your users' mind?
yeah.
Any user. So
Yeah.
these are the questions that mostly come when you are building front end. Okay, now should I come to the first
Let's
question that was
come back
around
to the
roadmap?
Yeah, let's come back to the roadmap. So we had discussed that for a beginner, they should start with HTML, CSS, build some static website like a portfolio website, then go on to JavaScript, then they can go to a framework like React or Next.js.
Yeah. After that, you have
Hmm.
to ask bigger questions. Like after you have the knowledge of these, you can get some internships from here itself. And
Hmm.
probably from there, you'll learn how to write scalable code. Because no matter how many side projects you build, it's not going to be scalable. Because only one in, let's say, 1,000 student is going to build an app which is actually going to end up in Play Store and users are going to use it. Not everyone builds apps like this. It's very rare. It's very rare. It's nothing to be ashamed about because even myself, I created a lot of apps in college days, a lot of them for hackathons, for side projects, for resume, but I never ended up putting anything uh, on Play Store per se. So, but when I was doing internships, when I was doing my job, then I built a lot of apps which actually ended up there. A lot of my features are running
Hmm.
in production. When I say production, it's like the real shipped app.
Yes.
But I can give a rough roadmap of how it will, if you don't want to do an internship at this moment itself. So after you learn React, what you should be doing is build another side project, thinking that the side project is going to end up in a huge startup or a project which a lot of customers are going to use
Hmm.
and a lot of developers are going to build. Keep these two simple things in mind, and then you'll be able to develop any application in a scalable way. One thing, a lot of customers are going to use it and a lot of developers are going to build it in future. Right now, you're the only developer who is building it, but in future, a lot of people are going to come.
Right.
So to answer and then ask questions uh, from both of these aspects. Let's say first, let's take the developers aspect. If a lot of developers are going to build it, first question is, how do you make sure that other people are going to easily start coding on the code that you have written?
Readability of the code.
Readability and maintainability. That's the basic thing. Let's start with contribution guidelines, as simple as that. Put your project on GitHub and add some contribution guidelines.
Hmm.
Secondly, let's say when a lot of other people are going to touch your code, it can break. So add
Hmm.
tests to individual components in your app. Let's say mostly in front-end application, let's say the one aspect of your app is business logic and one aspect of your app is styling, basic components, and some logic that happens behind rendering those components. For example, it could be when the user clicks on this, it has to scroll down and then it has to show a pop-up,
Hmm.
and then that pop-up should show some animation and so on. So that scrolling down logic, that parsing logic, like you get some response from backend and you have to parse it in a way and blah blah blah. All that comes in the business logic. And then the model or the view of that pop-up itself can come in the styles and animations. So write tests for both of them. You can probably learn Jest. Jest is a good framework that can help you. You can write stories. Storybook is a good framework that can
These
help
are
you
testing
do this.
framework, right? Front-end testing framework.
Testing, testing framework, yes. Jest can help you write unit tests.
Hmm.
So learn all about testing. That is the next thing that you are going to do. Immediate next thing after learning React, testing.
Okay. Hmm.
When you start learning testing, you'll figure out that testing itself is a whole domain in itself.
Hmm.
You have to first learn Jest. You have to learn about unit test, how to write good unit tests. Second, you have to learn about integration tests, how to
Hmm.
write good integration tests. Third, you have to learn about end-to-end test. Unit test tests the unit atomic level components itself.
Hmm.
Integration can test about how two packages interact with each other. That's a basic layman thing that I'm telling you. End-to-end tests are going to work in a way that how let's say the user comes to your app and interacts with your feature. How it's going to look end to end because your app could be divided into multiple packages itself. So you have to touch upon every single package that is involved in between the steps. Because when 1,000 developer works on a single code base, there are endless possibilities of how it can break. So this testing becomes very important. So for unit test, you can learn Jest. For end-to-end test, you can learn Playwright. Playwright is a very good framework. So keep taking a note of whatever I'm saying. I know
Hmm.
this was kind of a very on-the-spot discussion. So it
Yeah.
might not, I might not be telling things in a very structured way, but rewind and watch this podcast from the start so that you can keep taking a note of whatever I've said. But I'll summarize it again for you. First HTML, then CSS, then some CSS framework like Bootstrap or Bulma, then ReactJS, no, sorry, then JavaScript, then if possible TypeScript, then ReactJS. After ReactJS, you can either go for Next.js or you can directly start with testability. In testability, learn for unit test and learn Playwright for end-to-end tests. Okay. Then comes the next question. Okay, so developers from that perspective itself, always keep in mind the two perspectives:
Mm.
how other developers are going to add their code, and how end users, customers are going to use your app. These are the
Right.
two broad things that you, as an owner of the feature or the app, or a startup owner or a technical CTO or someone, you have to keep in mind. First aspect was testability. Second
Mm.
aspect was how do you make sure that the tests are running properly? For example, let's say you you put your app on GitHub, you put the code on
Mm.
GitHub. Now others are raising pull requests. Add some CI/CD pipelines. This is a concept that's covered in DevOps, but
Yeah.
DevOps is something which is not usually like, I don't think people hire specifically DevOps engineers these days. So an SD itself is kind of,
It's good to
I
know.
might
I
be wrong here.
mean, some organizations are hiring these days, but it's always good to know.
Yeah. So I might be wrong here when I say people don't hire DevOps engineers separately. They might, but at least from what
Mm.
I have seen, like I end up doing a lot of work in those
Yes.
CI/CD pipelines, even though I'm not a DevOps engineer. So everyone should know basic of these CI/CD. What CI/CD means is continuous integration and continuous deployment. So how do you make sure that whenever someone raises a PR and it gets checked in, firstly, how do you make sure that before it gets checked in, every single test is run? And
Mm.
you make sure that that PR is not, when I say PR, it means pull request.
Mm.
That pull request is not breaking any of the existing code, which basically means, if, let's say, if I own an application and you are a contributor to that application, or you are someone whom I hired to work on that application, how do I make sure that your the code that you are writing is not breaking my code, or the code that you are writing is not breaking someone else's code? To make sure that whenever you're contributing to that app, every single unit test and every single end-to-end test is run before merging that code. And then after, what comes after merging? Can that be automatically deployed as soon as the PR merges to
Mm.
reduce the deployment timelines, at least to some internal testers probably? Because earlier, when this concept of DevOps and CI/CD was not there, what used to happen was there used to be nightly builds, there used to be weekly deployments, and so on. You must have heard these terms, nightly builds. What happened was someone would go and trigger a build every night to make sure that
It
it's
was very
deployed.
manual.
It was very manual, yes. But now everything can be done automated. So this again opens a whole new world in front of you of automation. How much of the code, how much of the manual processes can you automate? So once again, front end is not just about front end. It's a part of development life cycle.
Yes.
And once you explore front end, you will explore multiple other areas like testing, like telemetry, like um, automated deployments, automation, and so on.
And what can you use for building these CI/CD pipelines, GitHub Actions?
GitHub Actions, if you're using GitHubs, it depends on what where you store your code. For most of the people, if it's GitHub, then GitHub Actions. And in GitHub Actions itself, there are multiple packages that you can use and build on top of. You don't have to write everything from scratch.
Also, for a college student, they should also be knowing Git very well before coming to do all this,
Yeah,
right?
yes. Git, you should know Git very well. Git and GitHub are the basic
Yes.
things. Okay. So again, from last 20 minutes, we are just discussing on the roadmap.
Right.
Once again, a quick summary: HTML, CSS, CSS framework, JavaScript, TypeScript, ReactJS.
Mm.
And then comes the bigger question, two questions. How are you make sure that end users are going to continuously get your product? How will you make sure that other developers are able to continuously build on top of your code? For the second one, latter part, we covered testability, uh, and mostly like continuous deployments and all these things. Let's come to the first question, which is how the end users are going to continuously uh, get your service or get your app.
Yes.
Now here comes another kind of thing, logging. Two types of logging: the usage logging and the diagnostic logging. So for example, let's say you are building an app
Mm.
which depends on a backend.
Mm.
Let's say Spriha builds an app for this uh, whatever peer-to-peer favor app which you were discussing earlier.
Mm.
Now it will definitely have some backend. Now it gets some data from backend and it has to show, you have to show it on the front end. Now let's say backend, someone else who is building the backend does some change and they send the data in some unexpected format. Are you
Hmm.
handling it properly? This is where the scalability of the app comes in. And this is where the end user's perspective comes in. The end user should never face that the app is broken. And that whole responsibility comes into front end developer's hand. Because if
Yes.
backend is broken, that's fine. Users are not seeing your backend, right? I'm not saying backend is bad or backend is less responsible. Backend has a huge responsibility in itself. The backend is completely responsible for the logic of the processing of the data, right? But then if backend fails and if user sees something unexpected, which they should not, people are going to come to front end developer
Yes,
because
that's true. Users are
front end
only
developer should,
happy.
right? User doesn't care. Like if I'm
Yeah.
using an app, which is, if I'm, let's say, if I'm using a food delivery app
Yeah.
and in and something happens because of which
It's
I'm
the
not able to make the
answer.
order, it crashes or anything happens. I don't care about what the backend is. I just saw the app is not working. And when the
Yeah.
app is not working, I might write a Twitter post about it. Hey, this app is not working. Hey, XYZ, this app is not working.
Creatively handling these failures is very important.
Right. And all these failures, most of these failures have to be handled on the front end. How do you do? Can you politely tell to the user that, hey, can you show a notification that we could not run this app, but please try again later? Could be as simple as that, or it could be as complex as rendering fallback components itself. So for example, let's say you're using maps on your device and somewhere in between the connection disappears and you're no longer connected to the internet. Do you
Yes.
suddenly stop the maps or do you still? You can actually try it. I was trying it and I was very impressed by this application. So I was going somewhere, I think a few months ago. I think this was last year. I was going somewhere and then a no network zone came in, but the maps application did not stop working. It
Offline
kept on
now.
working. I don't know
Yeah.
how. Offline maps. Yeah, it was still working. So all these things at the end of the day come into the front-end developers' hands. How are they handling downloading of that data and how are they making the most optimal use of hardware? For example, your phone. Your phone has a GPS. A backend developer cannot directly get your GPS settings or your gyroscope or other sensors, right? Your phone has multiple sensors. A backend developer can get that data, but it cannot directly touch it because at the end of the day, your backend is deployed somewhere else. But your front end app is running on your phone. So all these things. I hope now this answers the question that a front end developer's responsibility is not at
Yeah.
all just to
Yes.
style the components.
We all know now it's not just about moving a button from here to there.
Yeah, correct. Okay, so I answered that question for you on how how do you make sure a developer is able to work properly on your code by
Yes.
testability, CI/CD pipelines? Now, probably you should, as a viewer, whoever is watching this, you should answer these questions on how end users are going to use it. I can give you some hints. Focus about logging. How do you track whatever they do on your app? Let's say they clicked on some button. How do you track that this button, let's say there are 5 buttons on your app,
Hmm.
and let's consider a food delivery app. There are 5 buttons, let's say 5 options, 5 filters. One filter is price, lowest to highest. Next filter is uh, nearest nearest restaurant that's delivering the app. Another option could be highest discounted restaurants. Another option could be lowest delivery time. Okay, 4 options.
Hmm.
Now, as a developer, front-end developer, you have to make sure that you are showing the button which the users click the
Hmm.
most on as the first option,
Yes.
right? Because that should be immediately visible. And how do
Right.
you do that? You do experiments. You gather the data. You have to make sure that logging is in place, that
Hmm.
whenever the user clicks on any of those 4 buttons, you store it somewhere. That you might be not be storing that exact this user clicked on it because that can be a privacy issue. But then you know that X number of users 35% of the users clicked on cheapest first, highest discounted one. So probably instead of nearest restaurant first, you have to show a button that filters on the restaurants with highest discount. That's that that.
But can't this logic also
Hmm.
be handled by the backend though? So sometimes you
Yes,
have
it
to
can be.
trade off that where should the logic be handled, in the front end or the back end? How do you make that decision? Which
So
decision is
these,
better? Yeah.
that's a good question. Exactly. So that which one to show first, or you can have very complex analytics on your backend, may
Yeah.
even involve AI on the backend to make sure they understand that which option to show first. Again, that can come from backend. But how will backend know what option gets the most amount of clicks, what option gets the most amount of scrolls, what option gets the most amount of views? That
Hmm.
has to be at the end of the day integrated from front end, right?
Yes.
So that logic of analyzing that
Hmm.
can go onto the back end, no doubt about it. But even for the backend, so for example, let's say you have a sophisticated backend that analyzes all these things,
Hmm.
right? That's good. But to even get those, you have to get these as metrics, and those metrics need to be powered by front end.
Right.
And coming to your question on who should do it, front end versus back end, that's completely a design choice.
Yes.
That's completely an engineering choice. You can maintain that whole data on, you can maintain that whole, so for example, let's say there is an SMS application.
Yes.
And that's actually, I'm talking about a real application. You can try to guess which application I'm talking about. You don't do it here. Maybe this can be a question for the viewers.
Yeah.
Now, let's say I'm building a SMS application. Now that SMS application um, runs some classifiers and classifies your messages into promotional messages, personal messages, and transactional messages, and so on, multiple messages. So that as a user, you are able to see it in a very categorized view.
Yes.
And you, most of the time, 99% of times, you might be only concerned with the personal messages, with your
Right.
friends, with your family members, and so on. You might not be even concerned about the SMS that came after you made a 20 rupees shopping to get that packet of Lays, right? You might not be concerned about that. So you might not want to see that immediately. So to run those classifiers, do you want your front end to be running it or back end to be running it?
Hmm.
That's a simple answer here, that you would obviously want your front end to run it, because if your backend is running that classifier,
Yes.
how will the users trust your app? Because see, it's a simple thing. An SMS is
Hmm.
something which is very personal. If
Right.
I send an SMS to you, I would not want the backend of some XYZ company to see my messages.
Yeah.
Even though
Right.
they might not be seeing it, they might not be seeing it. Obviously, they can claim that they are not seeing it, but how do I trust it? I don't, right? If my data is going there, then I cannot trust them. So there are some applications like this which have almost zero backend, which are completely front end based. Some very optimized, some very cool AI models are running on the front end itself. But again, there are trade-offs. Let's say if you're building some other application where it's fine to send all this data to backend, where it's not very data sensitive, then you
Yes.
might not want to do this on front end, all this classification, all this processing logic, because it's always a trade-off. The more logic that you put on front end, you have to remember that's going to run on user's device. And not all users are running iPhone 16 Pro Max and stuff. Some users might be running a very old device, very old device from 10
Right.
years ago, and they might not have that much processing power. So again, it's an engineer's choice. So this is where these are the bigger engineering level questions
Hmm.
that you have to answer. And this is the crux of software engineering. This is not about front-end developer. This is not about back-end
Yes.
developer. This is the core engineering.
Engineering services. Yeah. Right.
Yep. I hope that answers the question.
Let us answer it. Okay. So are there any next let's talk about, do you have any courses or resources or articles, anything in mind where one can refer to get started? Someone who's
To get
completing.
started, yeah, to get started, first of all, as I said, form that roadmap, and you have to get a course for 2 or 3 topics together in that roadmap, or individually for each topic. For example, React.js, you can go and search on udemy.com. For HTML and CSS again, I think there was one instructor. I have never did her courses, but I heard some good reviews about her, Dr. Angela Yu. I don't know whether she's very good or not, but I've heard some good reviews. So what you can do is you can probably, if you want to do some free courses, you can take that individual topic. First of all, create a roadmap, as I told you. Then for each topic, let's say ReactJS, or let's say Jest, unit testing with Jest. Search on YouTube. Most likely you will get a good playlist on YouTube itself. As simple as that.
You also have a good playlist on React.js, right?
Yeah, I'm updating it. It's kind of 2, 3 years old, but things happen, and every year there's a new development that happens on React. My playlist is kind of 3 years old, so I need to update it. Probably I'll do it this week.
We'll look forward to it. Okay, so to end
Oh, did I
with,
say this week? Oh, this week would be not possible. I think my mind was somewhere else. I was thinking, not this week. I said this year.
this
This
year,
week is,
that's a
yeah,
long time. From this week, you went
that's
to
a
this
lot.
year.
Yeah, that's a long time. Yeah, it's difficult to manage YouTube.
All right. Okay, to end with, tell us how to create a good, solid profile so that, you know, you can reach out to, as a fresher, you can reach out for internships to companies, or even companies reach out to you on your own, on their own, right? So how do you
Hmm.
do that?
I'll make this one quick. Three simple parts. First of all, make as many side projects as you can. You can
Hmm.
either go to hackathons and build quick projects quickly, or you can work on a bigger side project. But as
Right.
many creative side projects as you can. Secondly, start blogging. You can use medium.com, you can use dev.to. Dev.to is an amazing website. You can use Substack, anything. There are so many apps these days. But start your own blog. And third thing is keep posting about your whatever blogs you're writing or whatever things you're learning on LinkedIn so that recruiters notice you. They notice you that you are learning something and you are actually giving information about this specific area that they are looking for. Because when they see your posts around, let's say some recruiter is looking for a React.js developer
Yeah.
and they come across your post that you are an amazing developer. For example, one of the posts could be, this is how I reduced the latency of my web app from 1500 milliseconds to 50 milliseconds. So explore these topics on your own. Do
Documenting
something
your
out of
journey.
documenting your journey. Don't be completely mainstream. Don't be conventional. For example, anyone can just follow a course and write a blog about that. Do something out of the box. You don't need to do it daily, maybe once a month. Try to think about performance is a very good area. Try to think
Hmm.
about, let's say you build a side application or a side project.
Hmm.
Now think about how do you measure the performance? How do you put performance markers there? That's something out of the box that probably most of the courses out there are not teaching you. What all features in your application
Hmm.
needs to be measured with performance markers,
Right.
and then write a blog about this is how I measure the performance of my application, and others can learn from it. And then next month you can think about starting from scratch.
No, you are
Okay,
still here. Continue.
got it. So the next month you can think about how do you improve the performance of your application. Can you prefetch some data? Can you lazy load some data? And so on. How do you reduce the package size and so on? So all these things. Every month try to think about something which is not just about a
Conventional.
simple, yeah, a
Huh.
simple, this is a app that I built kind of thing, or this is what I'm learning these days.
Add some of your own flavor to it. Got
Yeah.
it. Okay. Also, I think you have also written roadmaps and you have written many blogs, right, on Medium, etc. So do share those links. So we'll link it in the description for
Yeah,
anyone.
sure. I can share one roadmap for web development. That's
Yeah.
one I wrote. Yeah, I'll
I
share
think
that.
even the one on Git and GitHub that you've written is very nice.
Oh yeah, Git and GitHub. Yeah, that also I'll share. Good.
Yeah. So I think we are reaching towards the end of the conversation. As always, fun talking to you and thank you.
Thank you for calling me, and I hope this conversation, even if not a student or a hardcore backend developer is watching this video, I hope they can understand that Frontend is not just
Yeah.
about styling the elements, not just changing the position of buttons. Frontend is much more complex than that. So
Yeah,
thanks for
that's the
having me,
main
SPF.
message we are putting forward in this episode, that front end is not just about styling.
Yeah,
Thank you for
cool.
advocating that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Bye bye.
Bye.